Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to Mark. I always think it's really interesting when somebody like Mark describes you, because you sound wonderful and you actually want to meet yourself. So what I thought might be nice, when I introduce my fabulous panel of amazing speakers, I'm going to introduce them as Mark did me, and then I would like them to introduce themselves and put themselves in context. And to start that off, I thought I'd put myself in context in a bit of a kind of difference to what Mark had said about me. I have worked, I studied film and TV in college, and I've worked in, I suppose, post-production and television for half of my career. And I was thinking about this actually on the way in. I've been probably now over half my year employed as a freelancer. So it's kind of half and half. I was an employee and then I was a freelancer. I worked in a place called Windmill Lane. I started on reception when I was in college. In fact, I was a runner before that. But when I left college, I was employed as a post-production supervisor, worked my way up, and I was a studio manager at one point, and then left and went into the freelance world while still employed part-time in TV3. So throughout my career, I'll be talking about how I maybe broke through the glass ceiling or not, and that's what our speakers are going to do. So our first speaker is the wonderful Barbara Scully. Barbara Scully is a freelance journalist and broadcaster. She is regularly on the television, on TV3, on RTE. She's regularly on the radio, on the Moncrief Show. She also writes for national newspapers and magazines like the Irish Independent and the Irish Examiner and Irish Country Magazine. And now Barbara Scully is going to introduce herself.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's very interesting. I was just thinking, looking at all of us here, considering we're going to be talking about gender balance and about glass ceilings and about the gender pay gap, I'm the alphabetical balance here because everybody else's name starts with A and mine starts with B. How's that? Okay, so I left school 100 million years ago and didn't go to college, went straight into the travel business where I sold holidays very happily for probably the guts of a decade. That career ended when I became a single parent and decided I couldn't commute into town and do the whole thing on my own, but that's sin scéal mór eile. That led to a kind of a weird time in my life when I taught word processing. That'll give you an idea as to how old I am. Word processing was a whole new thing. And my mother had set up a business doing computer training, and I joined her in that. It was kind of surreal. I was only one page ahead of everybody else usually in the manual, but I managed to blag my way through that for a couple of years, and that finished when I went to work for a national charity, and I worked for the Alzheimer's Society for 10 years as their public relations and fundraising manager, which was excellent. During that time, I joined Respectability because I got married and I had 2 more children, and that was when the wheels all fell off the wagon. Third child, couldn't cope anymore, couldn't juggle anymore, and decided to retire for what was meant to be a year. 10 years later, the recession had hit, my kids were kind of heading into secondary school, and I decided to go back to work. And I think came up against the 2 barriers of ageism coupled with sexism, which was interesting, and which meant the jobs that I applied for which I was well qualified, and which I had loads of experience in, not only did I not get the job, I usually didn't even get as far as an interview. So having a 10-year, I was a stay-at-home mom on your CV, I don't think really, I'm hoping it's changing, but certainly it didn't work for me. So that made me very angry. It certainly made me, I was always a feminist, but it made me very much more of an angry feminist. And anyway, I decided to take some of the advice I give to my children all the time, which is do what you love. Do what you love. Don't worry too much about the job market, about how impossible it might be. What is it you want to do? And I realized I wanted to write, and I had also done some radio when I was working in PR. And so I kind of set about that. And it's still a work in progress, but it can, if I can do it as a saggy baggy owl one who spent 10 years at home with their kids, anybody can do it. So that's me.
Barbara Scully, well, we've loads to chat about there, but we're going to move on to our next speaker, who's Aisling Holly. Now, Aisling is very well known and highly respected in both the cosmetic and broader healthcare industries. In 2005, Aisling joined the Hospital Group, Europe's largest provider of cosmetic surgery, and later became the Operations Director for Europe, USA, the Middle East, UK, Spain and Ireland. Wow, Aisling, you've been very busy. Aisling opened her own business, Enhanced Medical, in December 2015, and they have 4 clinics across Ireland. That's just a snapshot of Aisling Holly, but now she's going to introduce herself.
Thank you, Andrea. She does make you sound amazing sitting there. My name is Aisling Holly. I have 2 children. My son is 12 and my daughter is 6. I've currently opened my own business in 2015, and certainly the decision for me to make that was certainly based around the pay gap. I've worked for many corporate companies during my senior management career: Stena Line, McDonald's, Brown Thomas, and I suppose really for me, in terms of that glass ceiling, certainly being female, I didn't experience the glass ceiling. I had a business degree, I left college, got out there, and for me it was very much about personal self-belief. It's about confidence. Women are definitely no different to men out there in terms of gender. You've got to be confident, go in there. Once you have the ability, and I suppose really at the end of the day, I'd probably be still working in that corporate world, in boardrooms with, 90% male, 10% female, and you've got to believe in yourself. It's all about inner confidence. Gender pay gap definitely made me in 2015 to say, do you know what? I really don't want to do this anymore. I believe in myself. I'm confident. In terms of the workload, I was traveling. I had a very large job spec. It was all about looking at global strategy, world strategy, and I delivered in exactly the same way as my male counterparts do. And at the same time, as I was rising through the ranks, I managed to have 2 children successfully. I'm still a very good mother. I still provide for the children. I'm still there in times of need. So, certainly being female, people say, oh God, how do you do that? How do you manage the workload? How do you get 2 kids up in the morning, get them to school? How do you fly to LA and know they're still okay, whatever? I was very lucky. I had great support within my own family network. My husband is also very supportive. But the most important thing is you've got to believe in yourself, believe in your ability. Women are as capable, if not more capable, than men within the workplace. You just got to work hard, be committed, be dedicated. You'll get there.
Wow, what a big lot of positivity there. And last but by absolutely no means least on our panel, Angela Mezzetti. I love that name, Angela Mezzetti. She's a radio and television producer and former journalist and newscaster with RT News. Angie produces Women in Leadership, the podcast, and runs workshops for women in media training. Angie has also produced 2 BAI documentaries on News Talk called Leading Women and Banking on Women. Banking, that's a bit of a soft K there, which focuses on the need of women in senior management levels. And now Angie is going to introduce herself.
Thank you very much. Angie Mezzetti. I grew up not 10 minutes away from here, so not many people in my class went to university, but I was lucky, I was able to go. And I went to Trinity, which was a total eye-opener for me because I didn't think I belonged with these kind of people. I thought they were up there and I was down here. But after a while, you just get a bit of cop on and say we're all the same. And it's the same between men and women. We're actually all the same. We all have different skills and abilities, but it comes back to what you were saying about confidence. And even the root of that word, confidency, it comes from the Latin with belief, and it's about believing in yourself, and that's a huge part of it. You really have to have that fundamental belief in yourself. And there are so many self-help books out there that you can, I think I've read them all and I've used tips from them all over the years. But after Trinity, I went into fundraising. I did a degree in economics and then went into fundraising in Crumlin Hospital, so something similar to Barbara. Worked in the charity sector, which is a great way of getting around the country, getting to know people. And then I went into RTE as a continuity announcer, which is the person who says, and now, coming up on RTE1, it's the news or whatever. And then I went into the newsroom, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when I went into the newsroom, because it was like having your fingers on the pulse of the country. The newsroom at the time was run by 3 men. It's now changed. There's 1 woman in the senior management team, but it was very much geared towards the men. And if you had children, well, that was your problem, and you didn't bring any talk about kids to work. Thankfully, that has changed. But I think having the first child, you can manage. The second child is a little bit more difficult. The third child, as you were saying, you don't know how you manage. You actually don't. You run on oxygen sometimes. You don't realise I don't know how I'm coping, but you do. You just keep going. And you do need to do what they say on Ryanair or Lingus. You put on your own oxygen mask first. You know those safety announcements they get, you know? You really have to look after yourself. You have to set aside time for yourself in terms of your mental health, your physical health, and, you know, even time away with your kids. I was involved with a training course for senior women civil servants, and I interviewed them at the end of it. These were women who were going for really senior positions in the civil service. And the one thing that they learned from hearing from other senior women who had made it to the top was, I need a cleaning lady. You know, it sounds really basic, but we try to do everything as women, and we're fools for trying to do it. This whole multitasking thing, I think, is a bit of a joke. And sometimes you really have to pull yourself back and say, I can't do everything. I have to specialise and do what I do and do it really well and mind myself. And that'd be my tuppence worth, for what it's worth, yeah.
Well, that's our panel today, and I think you'll all agree that we have a fantastic panel. There's going to be really good discussion here today. You're part of that discussion, so if you have any questions, we want to hear from you. But we're going to get a few key things out of the way. So the gender pay gap, what is it? It's very simple, as we all know. It's the difference between what men and women earn on average per hour, and that's before tax. The report from Morgan McGinley shows that the gender pay gap in Ireland is 34.7%, while it is 41% in the broader EU. So the average male salary in Ireland is €61,500, and the average female salary in Ireland is €49,500. So what do we know? We know that women are better educated than men, but earn less and don't climb the career ladder in the numbers that we should. So we want to explore today, is that by choice, or is there a culture that is discriminating against us? We also know that women are still underrepresented in management, and that's in sectors that they actually have more jobs in, such as healthcare or maybe in the education sectors. We also know that women are not represented in the Oireachtas as much, or in local authorities. So what is stopping women from climbing that ladder and breaking through the glass ceiling that's not here today? I'm going to ask my panellists first and foremost, to what extent do they think the gender pay gap exists, and have they ever seen examples of it, or indeed have they faced that in their own careers? So Barbara, I'm going to go to you first. Have you ever experienced the gender pay gap? Do you believe it exists, and have you witnessed it?
I certainly believe it exists, and I certainly have witnessed it. As to whether I ever personally experienced it, I don't know. And the reason I don't know, and I think this is a very important point, because I think sometimes we have discussions about the gender pay gap, and it seems to be just a clear case of women are not paid the same as men. And as you just illustrated, that's not what the gender pay gap is. We have employment legislation here, which means that it is illegal to pay a woman less than a man for the same work. So it's on average. And the reason the gender pay gap exists is because, as you said, women tend to get to a certain point in their career, which coincides with their biology kicking in, and they tend to either step back or step off for a while. And that is really what causes the issue. As to whether, now, that's the main thing that causes the gender pay gap. But there are other things that I think, as women in the world, and as men, because I think, and I'm delighted to see so many men here today, because this is not just an issue that women have to address on our own. This is an issue that men who call themselves feminists and equalitists should be equally as interested in. Secrecy, and or confidentiality, as it's probably called, in the industries that I worked. Now, again, I'm saying this was back a while ago. In the travel business, in the charity sector, nobody knew what anybody else was earning. So I don't know whether I was being paid less than a guy who was doing the same job as me. And I think that's something you have to be very aware of. There was one case in my own personal experience that it was my first job, and you know when you're very young and you kind of think you can own the world, and it's great. You have that kind of mad confidence that you kind of lose as you get older. I think it comes back as you get very old. I can see it coming back now. But when you're very young, you have that kind of mad confidence that you think, you know it all and you're great. My first job, I joined, I'll name the company, JWT, which were a big tour operator at the time, a big brand in Ireland. I was very happy, like Angie, thought I'd died and gone to heaven, was delighted at my job. The pay was awful, but the perks were great. I was happy out. At the end of my first year, I joined the company on the 3rd of December 1979, and at the end of the first year, all the staff got a bonus, and I'd heard all the staff talking about this. Oh, the bonuses are, great, you get a bonus at Christmas. So on the day that the bonuses were issued, I got my envelope delivered down to me, and it said, "Dear Barbara, unfortunately, as you are not long enough in the company, you don't qualify for a bonus, but here's a little token present, and have a happy Christmas."
Was that the gender pay gap, or was that just a time like what?
Well, it was only me and another woman who got,
Okay.
another young woman who got this letter. I don't know if any of the guys got it, but I only knew that another woman got it. And I knew it was unfair because we had actually done a year's work. But the other thing I think that does tend to hobble women, I got so mad, I stormed up, and my colleague, who was another woman, I was living at home at the time, she was from Waterford and was living in a flat, and she was like, "Barbara, please don't get us fired. Do you know, you're going to go up there, you're going to get the pair of us fired, and I need my job." But I went up and read Mary Hell to my boss and said, "This is blatantly unfair. I've worked here for you. I want a bonus. You can stick your present, wherever. I don't want it." I handed it back and I said I would like a bonus, which is what I'm entitled to. And I got a bonus. And so did my female colleague. But I think one of the things that women have a problem with and get stymied by is that we are afraid to use our voices. And that's because of the way that women are taught from the time we're girls, to be nice and to, be kind and be compassionate and be all those great things. But it does mean sometimes when you get mad as hell, you're a bit afraid to actually get mad as hell and to actually stand up and call it out. So I think the gender pay gap certainly exists. I didn't personally experience it, but in the industry in which I work and in which Angie works, it's obvious. We had coverage in the media earlier, a few months back about the BBC, about the women getting up in arms there, about the clear gender pay gap. Sharon Yviolon is clearly paid a lot less than Brian Dobson. We have a gender pay gap. We also have a gender woman gap in broadcasting, but again, Sin Scéal Eile.
Yeah. But interesting you mentioned confidence. We're going to go back to the whole parenting and the whole kind of dipping out when you become a mum. Aisling and Angie mentioned that as well. Aisling, I'm going to ask you, first of all, do you think the gender pay gap exists? Have you experienced it? Now be honest, or have you witnessed it?
Absolutely. Well, I've witnessed it personally myself, but I suppose looking back, there's various statistics out there. Looking back in 2015, for every 0.84 cent a woman earns, their male counterpart will earn €1. So it's prevalent like that. It is very out there. It is it's definitely existed in the workplace. From my own personal experience, certainly the gender pay gap. I was a global director of a company, which I'm happy enough to name. It was the hospital group Zurich Medical. Again, the medical field in general certainly would still have a gender gap back, for sure. Women are definitely still paid less. I was paid 50% less than my male counterparts. But I suppose at the time, again, I got lack maybe of internal confidence in myself. I was rising through the ranks at the most important time of my career, which was during my childbearing years. And for me, I learned very quickly, keep my head down, work as hard as I can work, and I'll get there. But I realised very quickly in a very male environment, working with 9 male directors and I was the only female on board, you almost nearly adapt. For me, I didn't see gender. I went into that boardroom and I suppose I kind of taught myself very early on, if I want to play with the big boys, I've got to be like the big boys. So for me personally, I didn't see myself as a female. I went in there, I was confident in my own ability.
Can I ask you though, because you mentioned that you're paid 50% less than the men that were working with you, that is actually illegal.
Yeah.
Had you ever considered, now I know you're only female in the room, actually this is illegal and I need to get legal advice on this, and would you have ever considered going to the powers that be and saying, actually, this is wrong, and or were you fearful of your position job?
No, I didn't realise, obviously I was on less. It wasn't until I became an official director of the company, looking through a P&L account, as you do, sitting there looking at the numbers and basically before signing off the audited accounts to say, well, I'm on the back end of this pack, whereas, what's on the balance sheet, where's the salary costs, and it was certainly from a P&L point of view, I went, wow.
So it's lack of clarity, it's lack of openness, and as exactly what Barbara said, she didn't know. So how do you know that you're being discriminated against if in fact it's not clear what everybody's earning
And it isn't clear.
in the company? Andrea, I'm going to go to you. Do you believe the gender pay gap exists? That's
I know
the
it
first question.
exists.
And then have you personally ever experienced it or witnessed it in your own personal career?
Yes, of course. I think everybody in the world, any woman who works knows that it exists. But I think, just to broaden it out a bit, I think so much of it is it's just about the system, and we're always talking about giving women more confidence and, you know, giving them more maternity leave or whatever it is. It's about fixing the women, but the problem is not about fixing the women, it's about fixing the system. And the systems, when they are fixed, like in countries like Norway, where they've brought it in that, you know, there's legislation in place to ensure that boards must have 40% of either gender. So it can't be all women and it can't be all men. That it works better and that you have the real talent comes to the top. And that's the only way. You have to fix the system. There's a thing called unconscious bias, which means when you put two CVs in front of people, and one is called Mary and the other is called John, they could have exactly the same qualifications. And both men and women will judge them differently because women are judged to have a certain skill set and men are judged to have a certain skill set. And they changed the rules when they were hiring people for orchestras in the United States, in that, all the main philharmonic orchestras, they were all primarily men, and maybe you'd have 5% women. But they brought in a new thing in the 70s. They put up a big curtain. So they did their auditions behind a curtain. So there was no way of telling whether it was a male or female. And just by doing that, the numbers automatically went up to 40% women because they weren't being judged by their gender or by where they looked. The only way they could judge was if they heard the clip-clop of heels. So after a while they had to go in soft shoes. But there are ways of getting around these systems, but it is systems-based. And they have this thing now in Trinity called the Athena Swan, and it's been brought out to other universities. So the universities have a disproportionately high number of men in senior professorships, and yet the majority of women are students. It's like 60% of undergraduates are women. The women dominate up to a certain point, and then, like in usual senior management jobs, it's the men that rise to the top. It's not that they're any better, it's just that the system discriminates against women, and often women opt out of the workforce because the system is too uncomfortable, particularly for caring. And when you think about the caring years, I know Barbara's talked about this before, it's only a blip, it's only a small time, and you think it's a huge part of your career. It's not. I did a podcast recently with Emer Caslin, who runs GSK, who make Panadol and all those wonderful medical products. And she said, when you think about it, of your whole working career, the number of years you're out on maternity leave is really small. And your children will actually survive. We worry about our kids. It's in our DNA as mums. We worry about, will they be okay? I've had 3 kids. They're all mature and they've all turned out fine. And I've always worked.
Angie, can I ask you a question? Because you said that there's a bias against women and men and 2 CVs on a desk, and we can all appreciate that. But from an employer's point of view, if you're thinking about hiring somebody, are you thinking, look what age they are, they're probably going to have children, and I'm going to be left with maternity leave and all sorts of things. So, what is the solution then? Is the solution then at government level to support people more when they're having children? Like, how do we fix that problem? Because biologically, unfortunately, women are the people who keep the species going, and we have children, so we can't change that. So how do we change it then from another side of things?
Well, what's the payback? They say, men are excused for things that women aren't. So the man comes in late, he was out with the lads, he had a few pints, so he won't be on full functioning. Women are so focused on being good girls. It's like it's drilled into us from the time we're very young. So we're very conscientious workers, and we don't get the credit for that. And women, when they're treated well as an employee, will give the payback tenfold over.
Barbara's dying to get in.
Yeah, I think how we fix this, and I think I wrote about this a while ago, the gender pay gap is a symptom of a much greater problem that we have. And this is a problem that all the developed world, and I would even say that they haven't totally addressed it in some of the Scandinavian countries where they have much better childcare, much better care leave and all the rest of it. The problem is, and I'm not going to blame feminism for this but there is feminism is kind of forgotten about. We, not just as women, men and women, caring has become something that has become completely of no value in our society. All of us needed care when we were born. Probably most of us will need it when we're on the way out. Caring it's the glue that holds society together. We have to have people who care for those who need it. Equally, we have to have our homes run. Angie mentioned about, women in the workplace suddenly saying, I need a cleaner. And absolutely, that's great. But the roles of those cleaners, the roles of the people who mind our children in creches, the roles of the people who look after our elderly relatives in nursing homes are among the poorest paid jobs in our society. Now, as a feminist, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, because I think I don't want to build women's success on the shoulders of other women who are getting paid ridiculously low wages for something that is an extremely important aspect of how we live our lives. So in order for us to make the gender pay gap disappear, to make glass ceilings disappear, to bring in gender balance in all aspects of work, which research has shown that the more women are involved and the more balanced any workforce or any board is, the better it is for the bottom line. The company is more successful. But in order to do that, and this is touching on what Angie said earlier, we totally have to change the way we work. We totally have to make the workplace way more flexible. We totally have to allow, and it's not just because, you'll hear, and I know there's a lot of young women here, when you bring up these kind of things, you'll hear various arguments that are spurious, such as if you're arguing for more gender balance, say in broadcasting. I've known women who've gone to station managers and have said, why have we not got more women broadcasting? And the answer they get back is, well, who are we going to fire in order to let more women in? And it's the same thing with, well, if parents want to take all this time off, what about the other workers who don't have kids? Why should they be picking up the slack? But caring, as I say, is not just something that parents will need. You may have an elderly relative, an elderly parent who you will need to care for. So we need to totally change how we view caring. And the more that we have commodified it, I think the more we are going down a wrong road. I read a report recently, which was really brilliant, by an academic whose name I can't remember. She was a woman who talked about the caring crisis that's coming down the road at us. Because as we're all living longer, we're not necessarily living longer. Those last 10 years very often can be quite difficult health-wise and can involve a level of care. So this is something we really have to, and it's not a problem, and this is one of the issues again that I have with talking about the gender pay gap and gender balance and glass ceilings and all those issues. This is a problem that we need to get men involved in as well. Because this is not something, women, okay, we actually have the babies, that's, great, but men are parents as well, and men are just as capable of caring as women are, and we've got to get them to step up to the plate more and to speak up about it more.
But I think what we can't deny is that there is a kind of motherhood gap. That when you have maternity leave, that creates a gap in your employment, and that can disrupt your path to your, climbing to the top, and it can disrupt your experience. Have you experienced that, Aisling? Because you employ people, and you know that people go off on maternity leave. There's a perception, rightly or wrongly, that women check out. There's a perception, rightly or wrongly, that women actually aren't as interested in the career after they have their babies, and they want flexi time, and they want less hours. So that kind of is a motherhood gap thing. Is that reason for the pay gap?
I think it's certainly part of the perception or the problem. Until we change mindsets in general, across the board, and again, it's about male and female. I suppose the shoe, I'm wearing I'm on the other side of the fence probably now because I'm an employer. 90% of my staff is female. And I suppose really it's all about forward planning. And certainly, in terms of the boardroom, when I worked at that executive level, I'm not working less or now than I would have been back then. But I suppose really when you go in at that level, you have to be realistic. When you're talking about a senior executive role within a corporate company, you're looking, what is expected of you? 60 hours a week is expected. Yeah, that's being realistic, that's what I was doing at the time. You're expected to be on call 24/7.
So there's more flexibility there. Angie, mommy tracking.
Yeah.
Mommy tracking. Hands up if you know what mommy tracking is. Hands up. Come on, there must be a hand that knows. Mommy tracking. Does anybody know what that is?
Angie obviously just made it up.
I think Angie made it up. Mommy tracking,
it's
tell
an
us what that is.
It's an American term. I think they came up with it in Harvard. It's when women come back into the workplace, and the assumption is, well, they're not really as interested in the jobs they want to work because they don't have a baby. So we'll give her a job in the side office, and she's not going to be interested in foreign travel. There's all these load of assumptions are made, which aren't necessarily true. I might be still, after come back from, glad to get away from the kids for a few hours a day. I might want to get on with my career, earn more money. This is where the pay gap comes in, but instead the perception is that's not what she wants to do, so you get set up in this side track. But I just wanted to come on to something related to what you were saying. There's this perception that, the cake, that we all contribute, the GDP, the gross domestic product, is only so big. So if men have this much, there isn't enough left for the women. But the actual statistics say something completely different. The more women that there are in the workforce, the bigger the cake grows for everybody. So
How so?
Because we're all making more, gross national product, that we're creating more wealth for the whole country. So there's more to go around for everybody.
Mm.
So, it's just about a mindset of not thinking about privilege. Men are most of them are in a privileged position, and they don't see, well, if you want to get ahead, you have to do everything that I do. Do you know what I mean? Where it doesn't necessarily work like that. I talked to a woman who's on the board of the central bank in Norway, and I was playing devil's advocate with her, saying, well, it's well for you in Norway. You have all these wonderful childcare roles, and you've got the gender balancing on boards. It's easy for you because you've got all this oil and gas wealth off the North Sea. You can afford all this. And she went, no. She said the contribution that women make to the workforce in Norway is worth more than all their oil and gas.
Wow.
I thought that was stunning.
Wow.
I'm just thinking, because I'm reading something here that says that there is a pay disparity, but actually women work less hours than men. And apparently this has been proven, that women actually work less hours than men, and that's why they earn more. And one of the most common claims around the gender pay gap is the unequal pay, right? But is that really the case? Is there really discrimination going on, or is there something else at play, Barbara?
Well, I think, as we said, that it is illegal to pay a woman less for the same job that a man is doing. So we will assume that most companies are playing by the rules. I think that lack of transparency is a definite issue and may mitigate against women. The fact that women aren't as quick to complain or to raise the issue if it becomes an issue. But again, at the risk of repeating myself, I honestly think that this is not. You're talking about the mummy tracking, which obviously is an issue. The kind of wisdom that we've all bought into, which is the fact that we want women to be in the workforce, which is great, and most women do want to be out there and earning and in the workforce. But I think also we forget sometimes about choice. And this holds true for men and women, but obviously it's way more obvious when it comes to women. But when I finally retired from my job in the Alzheimer's Society after my third daughter was born, and I was going to take supposedly a year off, and that's what I said. I said, I'm just resigning for a year and I'll be back in the workforce in a year. The amount of women in other companies that I would have dealt with on a regular basis who said to me, oh my God, you're so lucky. And I think there was a survey done recently that also said that the amount of women who became mothers and who said that if they'd had the choice, they would like to have had the option to take a couple of years out to be at home. And we need to look at that. And I believe, there's no research as far as I know on this, but I believe that there are probably quite a number of men who would equally like to be able to make that choice. But we've made it kind of non-politically correct to want to be at home with your kids. There's a kind of an unwritten narrative that says you're letting the sisterhood down if you actually say you want to be a stay-at-home mother for a while, or you want to check out of your career for a little while. And I think that that's a shame, because I think that, as Angie said, it's a very finite period of time, and everybody has to make decisions for themselves. But along with fighting for our equality as women and our ability to participate in an equal way in the workforce, we now have to redress the balance and say equally for men and women, if they want to take a couple of years out to spend, what many parents would consider precious years with their children, we need to look at how we can facilitate that. And I think that that's really important. And we're talking here all the time about kind of assumed heterosexual couples. I mean, there's same-sex couples who have kids. You know, you've got two men who could be bringing up kids. So, you know, we need to bring men into this conversation. And remember, you know, we've recently brought in paternity leave here. I think it's 2 weeks paternity leave is now available in Ireland. But as far as I know, the take-up rate is really small. And I think Ireland's not unusual in that. But you can't blame men, because they look at what it does to a woman's career. They kind of go, yeah, no, I think I'll stay on track here. Because if I do move sideways for a while or step out for a while, I'm going to be discriminated against when I come back in. And that is real. So we really desperately need the conversation to include men, to not make this about women, to not even make it about childcare, to make it a much wider conversation about the way we work. I mean, your description of working those huge long hours.
Unbelievable.
And I mean, you know, I think of young families nowadays who perhaps, you know, have long commutes because they, you know, can't afford a house nearer the city, so they're out a good bit. You've got these very long commutes. You've got kids going into crash at 7 a.m. and being picked up at 7 p.m. Not everybody wants to live that way. And I think that we really have to look at much more of how we bring in a balance to all of that, not just a gender balance, but a care balance as well.
And I think one of the points that I know we're sort of going around, and we've spoken a lot about children, and that is a huge problem, but one of the points that we wanted to talk about is to what extent the glass ceiling really is there for women in senior management roles. And actually, I'm going to ask you about that, you've so much experience there. Was there any other female in senior management roles while you were going through your career? And when you did see that profit and loss analysis, did that surprise you that for so long you were being underpaid? And did you kind of say, how can we strike a balance here?
Yeah, I suppose really at the time, I just assumed it was fair game and everything was fair across the board. So I didn't ask those questions. I just assumed that, you know, certainly my salary would have been the same as my male counterparts. I also had a bigger job role. You know, I was once described with a chief executive who I worked with, called me a doer. Yeah, I was a doer. And as being part of that process of trying to prove myself and being that doer, I ended up with a bigger workload than some of my male counterparts because I was a doer. I was also told once that I looked like a woman, but I thought like a man. Now, I suppose really, I got very resilient very quickly.
So what were you told? You looked like
I looked like a woman, but I thought like a man.
Is that a compliment?
I don't know. I'm still, you know, 10 years on, I'm still there saying, you know, scratching my head, what did that mean? I had to have a tough skin. You know, at the same time, I had to realise as a female working at that level, I couldn't see myself as a female. I couldn't cry if I was shouted at or whatever. Like, I had to take the workload, the pressures, the same way that the males did. They saw me in a very different way. You know, I was subject to that sexist discrimination, you know, and the blonde jokes and, you know, makes the boardroom look pretty. And, you know, I remember sometimes, you know, going to some senior banks in the UK when we'd be going to report on a financial year end, you know, and you'd always get the looks when you'd walk in and they'd be almost nearly assume you were the chief executive's PA. So it really is all about changing mindset and perception out there. I don't believe there's a glass ceiling for women. We're as educated as men, if not, you know, more women have third level qualifications. You know, it's all about you deciding where is your career, what do you want to do, where do you want to go? You know, and the sky's the limit. For me, it was about creating my own destiny. I don't think I would be where I am today if I didn't have those experience at a corporate level working with men. It made me understand men differently. It made me realise that women, and I'm not discriminating against any man in the room, women manage very differently to men. You know, their thought process is very different. You know, they're very methodical. You know, they've certainly got a little bit more empathy in the workplace. And I was probably a better decision maker than some of my counterparts. I had a better relationship with the staff because I listened. You know, I understood, you know, obviously, and certainly I was probably a little bit more supportive with women in the workplace because, you know, if you plan for the eventualities, you know, if there's a death in the family or one of the children are sick, you know, you've got to understand the situation. Somebody who remains in the workplace and you put them under that pressure to do so won't perform, they don't deliver. You know, and it's about give and take, and that's how you generate loyalty in the workplace. You know, for me, it's a dual contract. The employee and the employer, you know, they're trying to achieve the same focus, they should be on the same wavelength, and it's very much the employer giving and taking with the employee, and it's about generating that level of loyalty.
I see Angie nodding her head as Barbara is, but Angie, there was a question I was going to ask you, because of course you interview so many women in business, so many women in leadership, and we're forgetting something very important here. What we're talking about is actually illegal, and it's discrimination to pay somebody differently. But in your experience, chatting to all these women, have you known anybody who's ever gone to court proceedings and actually fought the gender pay gap kind of
I think
argument?
an awful lot of women who've risen to senior management have got there despite the blocks that have been put in their way, and nearly all of them will tell you that they've come across sexism and some awful things have been said. I mean, I have a thing on the website that says jaw droppers. There isn't a woman in the workplace will not tell you that she's been told something and she just goes, like, what the hell was that? I wouldn't normally say hell, but you know the other word I'm thinking of. You know, what was that? Did I really hear that? I was watching Hillary Clinton, she was on with Graham Norton last night, and she said during one of the debates she was walking up and down, and Trump was walking up and down behind her, and she thought for one minute, do I turn around and challenge this? And she didn't, and I think she still wonders whether that was the right thing or not. Do you call it out when it happens?
So is it important to have legislation in place there if nobody's using it and if we're not accessing it? So does it really matter then?
Can I just bring up that? I think sometimes, because we're brought up to be seen and not heard, like from the time we're very young, it's very hard for us to use our voices, as the girls were saying. You know, we have to get used to using our voices and not being afraid of it.
What do you think about the legislation, Barbara?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think certainly if anybody sees and knows, but the problem is you have to be sure of your ground. You have to know for sure that you are being paid less. I think that's where it can become difficult. But I mean, obviously, I think anybody. But I think it's more than that. And Angie just touched on it there. It's about women and men calling it out. In other words, if there is a sexist comment, you know, a lot of women in a workplace. And you know, we all know all the awful stories that are coming out of Hollywood at the moment. And there's been various campaigns online about this. But it's really important that women call it out, and that women stand up and say, sorry, that's not appropriate. Whether it's just something that you might think is reasonably minor, but if it's anything that makes you feel uncomfortable as a woman, then it should be called out. And you shouldn't be afraid to do that. And the other thing, that I would just say is that most women in the workplace will also, or if you're a mouthy woman like I tend to be, you get used to the kind of name, you know, you'll be described as kind of shrill or bolshy or bossy, or, you know, we know all those words that are purely kept reserved to describe women who insist on the playing pitch being equal and who insist on calling things out. And we've got to get over our natural, as Angie said, reticence to not want to kind of raise our head above the parapets, not want to be known as a troublemaker, not want to be known as whatever. And we've got to support other women that we see doing that. That's really important. Yeah.
It's really important that we be like a good bra. Support the girls.
Support the boys.
Yeah.
Support all people, men and women.
Can I just say, boys are terrific. I admire men, so they always support each other. It's like they're on the same team, they will support each other, and that's their strength.
So
we
should
don't
there
do
be
it as much, and we need to do it more.
Should there be more? The answer to this is, as well as a society that's going to support men and women, and particularly the childbearing years, which we know we can't avoid, but should there be clarity, absolute clarity, what everybody's earning in the office? You should be able to know what the person next to you is earning if it's for the same life.
Well, you see, I have no problem with any workplace being operated on you know, as a meritocracy. You know, if you're better at the job, maybe you should be paid better. I don't have an issue with that, but you know, it's how you balance that. And I think that I think that women are great at listening to their gut instinct, and I kind of feel there's something here that's not wrong. Ask the question, am I being paid? Where am I on a scale? You know, if everybody's, you know, in there, where am I on the scale, and why am I not up the top? So I think it's about, again, as I say, being a lot more assertive than we are used to being.
I'm just going to check on time because we could talk for a very long time and there's nobody in my ear telling me to stop. How are we doing time-wise? Are we going to ask some questions? Do we want to go to the floor for questions, or can we keep going with this? Great. Mark is the host here, so I have to keep an eye on Mark. I was going to ask you a question, Aisling. If anybody has any questions, think of them, because you know it's always great to get some interaction from you as well. In terms of advice, Aisling, and I was wondering, your picture of seeing the profit and loss pages and knowing you were paid less for so many years, I would go absolutely mad. The anger in me would rear up and I'd want justice. I mean, would you ever, or had you ever been in a position where you knew that somebody was being paid less, you know, potentially somebody that was doing the same job and they were male, would you ever tell that person secretly and kind of say, listen, you know, you need to go up to senior management about this?
I would, you know, I suppose really for me, it was certainly the catalyst for me to make my own decision to say, well, do you know what, I can do this myself. You know, I don't need to be here to prove who I am or prove my capability or whatever. And for me, it was that turning point in having the confidence in myself to say, and now we're competitors. Yeah, we now compete against each other, you know, and we'll have banter and he'll say, I know how you think, and, you know, he'll be sitting in the background of our picture.
She thinks like a man, but she looks like a woman.
The same contract. But I suppose really, what women need to realise out there, Ireland are actually not, we're almost, like we are getting there. 2 out of every 5 senior management positions currently in Ireland is filled by women. Every three women out of every 5 in Northern Ireland have senior management positions. So like, we are getting there. You know, that's a huge representation across the board. You know, and Richard Bruton there yesterday evening, he's now trying to entice mothers who are at home, who are qualified to teach, to get back out there and get back into the work.
But like, that's a joke when the government try and do that and they don't do anything serious about childcare. You know what I mean? If they're serious about that, yeah, do something about childcare. And the other women I think that we leave out of this conversation, and they're usually women and some men, are single parents. Do you know, who need that extra support in order to be able to compete in all of this. And I think that, you know, we can forget about the kind of the extra stymied that they are because of the fact that they're trying to do it all on their own.
There was a question that we always get asked, and it drives me mad whenever I used to do Midday in Elaine with Barbara. The question every third week is like, can women have it all? And it used to drive me mad. Angie, can women have it all? You know, that question.
Everybody
But
has
like,
it all.
why can't men have it all? Why would you even, you know, isolate women in that question?
Yeah, there's always going to be sacrifice. I think she's right. But I think there's one thing I'd really like to bring up, and this comes up with all the women that I talk to, all these senior level women. And it's about the silo mentality, what they call the silo mentality. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier, women work less hours. I would argue that they actually don't work less hours.
Yeah.
I'd say they officially work so many hours and then they go home and do more work. Or they do work in the home, which is extra hours, because we do. But this,
The double
this
shift.
silo mentality that if I sit here, if I do a good job, somebody will come and notice me. That does not happen. You have to promote yourself. You have to tell people, I'm good at this job, this is the results I got for last year, and that can be really difficult. It's a really difficult thing that women have to do.
And don't,
Doesn't come that easy.
and don't undervalue yourself. You know, if you're self-employed, I met a woman during the week on a professional basis for some advice, right? We spent over 2 hours with her. Very qualified woman, works for herself. And at the end of it, I said to her, now how much do I owe you? Panic, rabbit in headlights. She was like, I know if that was a man, he would have said, whatever. When she told me how much, it was way undervalued as well. I ended up giving her a lecture as well about it. You need to value your time and you need to be not afraid to say it. But I do think that as women, we do undervalue ourselves across all areas.
And that comes in because everybody here today has mentioned confidence. The confidence in yourself, the self-belief in yourself, and just to believe that you deserve to be on an equal playing field. And as we've heard from all of the ladies here, and you know, we can all do it, you know, and Aisling went out and did it for herself. We're all freelancers, so we obviously believe in ourselves because we believe that the money is going to come in tomorrow. I'd love to go to the audience and to have a chat and have a bit of engagement with you, and you probably want to ask our wonderful panellists some questions, or if you have advice or there's something in particular to your story that you'd want us to ask us. Has anybody any questions? Hands up. Somebody please ask a question. We need a brave person. Normally I have somebody in the audience that would always ask.
A plant.
You're going to ask a nice question, aren't you? And we'll get you might have Mark. There's a lovely lady in the front here who's going to ask a question. Yes. Yes.
Hello, thank you very much. That's very interesting. For me, it's very interesting to understand or to know how can you actually, like you made the example that at work you did not know how much your colleagues were getting money. So how can you actually find it out? Because usually at work you don't talk about the money, also you can't ask your employer how much is he getting. So how can you get this transparency at work?
Good question, actually, and that actually came up today, that none of us have really know if we've ever been underpaid because we just don't have that information. Aisling?
I think it's down to employees, you know, to challenge employers. Get into that HR department, ask the question. I suppose in 2017, certainly perception will be out there that you shouldn't have to ask that question, you know, that there's equality in the workplace, but certainly, you know, underlying that gender pay gap is there. It does exist, certainly within senior management roles. We know in Ireland the gender pay gap at senior level is still at 16%. It's 13.9% across the general playing board, but at senior level, it's still at 16%. So, you know, certainly what I would say, don't be afraid to challenge employers. You know, get in there, ask the question.
Angie, would you have, or Barbara, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would say exactly the same, you know, and I mean, I know, and you know, you may not get, you can't go in and say, I want to know what Michael over there is earning, you know, I want to know exactly what he's earning. But I think you can phrase it in such a way as, you know, if there's a scale, where am I on the scale? And if I'm not, you know, fairly high up, why am I not? What am I doing that's, you know, a challenge? I think for too long women have been quiet. So I think challenging your employer, you know, in a way that's not going to get you immediately fired, you know, but asking questions, I think, and asking probing questions.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Through the ranks, you know, that glass ceiling is there for sure, you know, and you can break through it. But it's about women having the confidence in themselves to apply for those roles. You've got to believe in yourself 110%. Most women, and certainly when you read some of the statistics there, you say, women look at the job role and they say, you know, and they hesitate. You know, they don't have that self-confidence to say, yes, I'm qualified to do that job role. I can do that.
That's very true.
Angie?
The evidence actually backs that up exactly. They say when a man and a woman look at the exact same job application, a guy will look at it and say, there's 10 qualities there, I have 3 of them, I'll go for the job. A woman will see the 10 qualities and say, well, I've only got 9, maybe I shouldn't. And the thing is, that has been proven statistically, and the thing is, when you do go for and apply for a job that you think is above your pay grade, is above your, it gives you something to aim for. And even if you don't get the job, you show up on the radar of your employers, and they'd say, well, maybe she wasn't right for this job, but she's obviously got some ambition and wants to go somewhere. So always apply, always aim high, you will hit something, go for it.
Because there is, they say, with the glass ceiling, Irish women are dubbed at not only seeing the glass ceiling but being stuck to the floor. And generally that means it's they're not applying for these roles. So get out there, be confident, believe in yourself. If you have the qualifications, you know, family support, and again, it's changing the mindset for men. There was a Harvard study over 7,000 men between the ages of 27 and 67, and it was their perception, it was the men's perception that the spouse should take the responsibility of the childcare. My household is very different. My children get sick. My husband, you know, it's what can you do with the day? You know, it's very much split 50-50, and that certainly allows me, you know, to remain in the workplace.
Final points. I think we're running out of time, so I'm just going to allow the wonderful, brilliant women here to say any final points. And Barbara Scully is right in there to say something.
Just strictly, as Ashley was talking there, I would appeal to the men here to take up the slack at home because you're not doing it at the moment. Study after study shows that women are still pulling the double shift, doing the work, coming home and then doing the lion's share of the housework, cleaning and the looking after the kids. So I would appeal to you as men, if you're here because you're interested in gender equality and if you think you're a feminist, will you please make sure you're picking up your socks, doing your share of the washing and also looking after the kids at home. Really important. And teaching your sons that as well.
Angie Mezzetti, final words please today.
Well, that one. Yeah, my husband, when I got married first, he said to me, my socks have a hole in them, would you learn to darn? My mother used to darn them, I just got them and I flung them out of the window. I said, you can buy another pair in Dunn's, you know, but for $2.99 or something. I said, we have to start valuing ourselves. You have to go and lock yourself in a room with a mirror and say, you're great, you know.
Your
really.
podcast, if anybody wants to...
Womeninleadership.ie.
Womeninleadership.ie.
And it's on iTunes as well.
Aisling, Holly, who've been really inspirational. Any final words?
No, just believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself, believe in your ability. You know, there is no glass ceiling there. You create that glass ceiling yourself.
Do you want to give your website out just to give a final plug before you go?
www.enhancemedical.ie.
And Barbara Scully has a great, it's not a podcast, you write it, I can't think of the word. Blog is the word I
My
was
website is barbarascully.com. Yeah, my blog is off that. It's called From My Kitchen Table.
Thank you so much. Sorry for going over. Thank you for being so patient. We hope you've enjoyed it and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you very much.